It's been almost a year since I found out my wife cheated on me, and honestly, I still feel like I'm waking up in a nightmare every morning. The whole thing started small at first. Little things I brushed off, comments she made, her phone buzzing at odd hours, her sudden interest in grieving together with my best friend during my mother's funeral. I remember that day vividly because everything felt off, but I didn't want to admit it. I was already raw from losing my mom, and I clung to the hope that maybe I was just overthinking it. We were at the funeral home, sitting stiffly in a sea of condolence. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of lilies and burnt-out candles. My wife sat next to me, her hand resting lightly on my thigh, but her eyes kept drifting toward Jake, my best friend. I caught her stealing glances at him more than once, little smirks, the way her fingers played with her necklace nervously. I figured she was just trying to console him, but something about it made my stomach churn. Later that week, I noticed her phone kept lighting up with texts. I should have just left it alone, but I didn't. I was numb, and maybe that's what made me reckless. I snuck into her room while she was in the shower. The phone was right there on her nightstand, glowing with messages from Jake. I remember my hand trembling as I unlocked it, trying to keep my breathing steady. The texts weren't just about grief or support. They were intimate, flirty, suggestive, full of inside jokes no one else would understand. One message from Jake read, "Tonight was the best I've felt in a long time. Thank you for being there." My chest tightened. My mind spun. How could she do this? During my mother's funeral, no less. I could feel my jaw clench so tight I thought I might break a tooth. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, my pulse pounding against my skull. My palms turned clammy, my stomach twisting into a knot. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but all I managed was this cold, sick feeling in my gut. I knew then that the woman I loved, the woman I married, had been lying to me from the start. She wasn't grieving with him, she was sneaking behind my back, letting my grief become her excuse to get close to him. I sat frozen in her room, the phone still in my hand. I didn't bother confronting her that night. What would I even say? How could I? The truth was already staring me in the face, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's when I realized I couldn't ignore the red flags anymore, her evasiveness, her late-night excuses, the way she brushed me off whenever I tried to talk about my mom. All of it now made perfect sense. But the worst part, I wasn't sure how much of her was real. I kept asking myself if she ever loved me or if I was just some temporary placeholder in her life. The betrayal cut so deep that I could feel it in every breath I took. It was like a cold whisper in my ear, telling me I'd never really known her, never truly understood what was behind her smile. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't ready to confront her yet. The pain was raw, but beneath it there was a flicker of cold resolve. I'd been blind, but now I could see clearly. I just didn't know what I'd do with that clarity yet. All I knew was that I had to find a way to get answers, and if necessary, even the score. The question haunted me: what part of her had been real? And more importantly, how could I trust anything after this? I didn't sleep that night, and as dawn crept in, I felt the weight of betrayal settle squarely on my chest. I was about to find out exactly how far I was willing to go to get what I deserved. The next few days were a blur of cold calculation. I couldn't get her texts out of my head, how she'd lied, how she'd betrayed me during the one thing I thought was sacred, my mother's funeral. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirking, her fingers brushing against Jake's arm, whispering secrets I never knew. It felt like I was walking around with a virus infecting my thoughts, infecting my trust. I knew I had to gather more evidence, but I also knew I couldn't just walk in and accuse her blindly. That would blow up in my face, and honestly, I didn't want her to catch me snooping again. So I devised a plan. I started paying closer attention to her routines, watching her movements, listening for any slip-ups. I kept my phone at the ready just in case I found something more concrete. One evening, I followed her when she said she was meeting her sister for coffee. She'd been acting anxious, fidgety, like she was hiding something. I tagged along at a distance, keeping to shadows, my stomach knotting tighter with every step. She led me to a small, nondescript apartment complex a few blocks from our place. I watched her unlock a door and then I saw him, Jake, popping out of that same building. They exchanged secretive smiles and she hugged him quickly like they didn't want anyone to see. That was my sign. I needed proof, something undeniable. I snuck back home, my mind racing. I knew where they were meeting, but I needed to catch them in the act. I started researching how to set up a trigger, something discreet but effective. I bought a tiny voice recorder online and hid it in her purse when she went out the next evening. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it echo in my ears. I kept telling myself, just to be sure, you need to be sure. That night I sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on her as she grabbed her purse and headed out. She looked over her shoulder at me once, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. I held her gaze and said, "Have fun." Her lips curved into a false smile and she nodded. As she left, I felt like my stomach was about to drop out of my body. My palms were sweat-slick as I pressed record on the device I'd hidden in her purse. The moment she closed the door, I exhaled sharply, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I stayed awake all night, listening to the recordings I'd made. Her voice was calm, flirtatious even, as she talked to Jake about plans for tonight, giggling at inside jokes. I could hear her touch her hair, brush her fingers across her phone, every small gesture that confirmed my worst fears. When she finally came back home the next morning, I was waiting in the living room. She looked surprised, maybe even guilty, but she quickly masked it. I blocked the doorway and held up the recorder. "Care to explain this?" I asked coldly, voice steady but tight. Her face drained of color. She tried to play it off, giving some half-assed excuse about checking her phone, but I cut her off. "Don't lie. I know everything, the texts, the meetings, the sneaking out." My voice cracked, but I kept my composure, feeling a strange surge of power. "You lied to me during my mother's funeral, and now I think I get why. You wanted to get close to him, didn't you?" She stammered, caught with that guilty look she'd worn all along, but I saw through it. That's when I realized I couldn't just leave it at the heartbreak. I had to plan my revenge. I was furious, yes, but also calm, methodical. I didn't want to blow everything up in a fit of rage. I just wanted her to feel what I felt, betrayed, humiliated, powerless. That's when the seed for my plan took root. Over the next few days, I spent every free moment fine-tuning my plan. I knew I had the proof now, those recordings, the texts, her sneaking around, nothing could undo that. But I wanted her to understand exactly what she'd lost, and I wanted to do it on my own terms. Revenge wasn't just about making her suffer. It was about making sure she felt the depth of her betrayal in a way she couldn't deny. I started with the small things. I removed her keys from her purse, hid her phone, and made sure she couldn't access her usual escape routes easily. I didn't want her to walk away before I was ready. I also set up a few surprise encounters. I knew she'd be craving some of the comfort she'd been seeking with Jake, so I made sure she'd run into a few people she knew, just to remind her that her actions had consequences, all those little social whispers that could spread. One evening, she was out again, supposedly to meet her sister. I knew she'd go to Jake's place. I'd been watching, planning my next move. I waited until I was sure she was gone, then I headed to her phone. I knew I couldn't just delete everything. She'd notice. And I didn't want to make it obvious I was behind everything. Instead, I installed a remote app that would let me monitor her calls and messages without her knowing. It was subtle, sneaky, but it gave me ongoing access to what she was up to. While I was doing that, I also slipped a note into her purse, right under her makeup bag. It was simple. "I know everything. Don't bother denying it anymore. When you're ready to talk, I'll be waiting." I didn't want to destroy her completely. I just wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to understand that I was capable of making her regret it. The next day, she confronted me unexpectedly. I was sitting on the couch when she stormed into the room, face flushed, eyes blazing. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, holding up the note. Her voice was sharp, but I could hear the tremor underneath. I looked her straight in the eyes. "You've been caught, sweetheart. I have your texts, your recordings, everything, and I've been watching you." I let the words hang in the air, knowing that the shock was only the beginning. "You lied during my mother's funeral, lied to my face, and I don't think I can ever trust you again." She tried to deny it, to spin some story about how she was just grieving and how she didn't mean to hurt me, but I'd heard enough. My stomach clenched painfully at her pathetic justifications. You think I'm stupid? I saw the messages. I heard the voice recordings. You've been betraying me all along. My voice cracked, but I wanted her to understand I was serious. Now I wasn't just angry, I was calculating. I told her I needed time to think, but I already knew what I wanted to do. I had to make her feel the loss, the betrayal, the humiliation, and do it without crossing into outright violence. I wanted her to see what her actions cost her. That's when I revealed my plan. I was going to make her regret this for the rest of her life, but in a way she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I kept the details to myself for now. I knew I'd need her cooperation, or at least her compliance, for the final phase. I watched her eyes flicker with a mix of fear, disbelief, and something else, resignation. She knew I was serious now, and I think part of her realized her secret was out. That confrontation was just the beginning. I could feel the tension thickening in the air. I had her cornered, and I was about to turn the tables in a way she'd never expect. I wanted her to understand, in the clearest terms, that I wasn't just going to walk away. She'd regret betraying me during my mother's funeral, and she'd wish she'd never crossed me. I was ready to execute the next step, and I could tell she was starting to realize that her carefully constructed lies were crumbling. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. With each step my wife took further into her own unraveling. I kept my cool, but inside I was burning, every nerve alive with the need for justice, or at least some form of cosmic reckoning. I had everything I needed now, the recordings, the texts, her reactions, but I wasn't going to confront her directly again just yet. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to start doubting herself, to realize she was no longer in control. I kept up the illusion of normalcy. I'd sit on the couch pretending to watch TV, but secretly I had her phone in my pocket, monitoring her every move. I made sure to keep her in the dark, but I was setting the stage for the final act. I knew she'd go out again, probably to meet Jake. I'd planned something special for that night. Before she left that evening, I handed her a small package. She looked at me like I was crazy, her brow furrowed. "What's this?" I shrugged. "Just something I thought you'd like, to remind you what's at stake." I watched her carefully as she opened it. It was a simple, unassuming box, but inside was a small voice recorder. I'd rigged it to activate when she opened it, so I'd get every word. She looked at me with wide eyes, suspicion creeping in. "Seriously, you're stalking me now?" "Just covering my bases," I said, voice steady. "You're not leaving tonight without me knowing exactly what's going on." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. It was the first crack in her facade. I could see her trying to keep her composure, but her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the recorder into her purse. She was scared good. That's exactly what I wanted. If she thought I was done, she was dead wrong. That night I sat back and waited. Sure enough, she left around 8 p.m., heading for Jake's apartment. I followed at a distance, my stomach tightening like a steel trap. I parked nearby and watched her walk in. The lights flickered on inside, and I knew she'd go through with it. No hesitation, no stopping. I'd caught her red-handed, and now I was going to make her pay. I returned home and set my plan into motion. I'd already told a few friends about her betrayal, just enough for a ripple, not a tidal wave. I wanted her to feel like her world was crumbling, but I also needed her to believe I was unaware of her final steps, so I called her from an unknown number just to keep her guessing. "Hey," I said casually, "don't forget your keys." "I'll be waiting for your call." She answered immediately, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" "I want you to think about what's coming. You're in deep and I'm not letting go. When you get back, we'll talk properly." She hesitated, then hung up. I smiled bitterly at the power I held. That voice recorder I hid in her purse. It was capturing everything, her whispers, her muffled laughter, her promises to Jake. Every word was gold. I would use it, but not yet. I wanted her to think she was still in control, that she could get away with it. When she returned, I was waiting. She looked exhausted, like she'd been running a marathon. Her eyes darted around the room, trying to read my expression, but I kept my face cold. I reached into her purse and pulled out the recorder I'd hidden there earlier. "Let's listen," I said softly, pressing play. Her face went pale as her private conversations flooded the room, her flirtations, her promises, her giggles with Jake. I watched her squirm, her hands clenched into fists. That was the moment I knew I had her cornered and I wasn't going to let her out now. "You lied to me," I said quietly. "You betrayed me during the worst time of my life, and now I get to decide what happens next." I leaned closer, voice low but firm. "You can either come clean or I'll release everything, your texts, the recordings, the proof. Everyone will know what you really are." She burst into tears, clutching her head. "Please," she sobbed, "I didn't mean for it to get this far." I shook my head. "Sorry, sweetheart, it's too late for apologies. You made your choice." I knew this was just the beginning. I had everything I needed now, and I was going to make her regret it for real. I stepped back, feeling the cold satisfaction settle in my chest. I'd never forget how her face looked that night, defeated, humiliated, and finally knowing she'd lost everything she once valued. I was about to execute the final part of my plan, and I could tell she knew it too. The game was over. The aftermath hit her harder than I expected. I could see it in her eyes. She was trembling, almost broken, as she stared at the recordings playing on my laptop. Her lips trembled, but no words came out at first. She knew she'd crossed a line and now had to face the consequences of her choices. I stood there, feeling every bit of the cold satisfaction I'd been building up for days. I finally broke the silence. "You lied, you cheated, and during my mother's funeral, no less. How do you sleep at night?" I kept my voice even, but inside I was seething. She looked away, avoiding my gaze. That's when I knew I had her right where I wanted her, completely vulnerable. I moved closer, my fists clenched, and said, "Here, what's going to happen now? You're going to pack your things and you're leaving today." Her eyes widened. "What? No, wait, I can explain." "Don't bother," I cut her off sharply. "You've explained enough. I don't want your excuses. I want you gone. I want you out of my life, and I want you to remember this moment forever, the moment you lost everything." My stomach churned with a strange mix of rage and relief. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. She hesitated, tears streaming down her face, but she knew she had no leverage. I handed her a duffel bag I'd already packed. "Take your stuff now and don't come back." I watched her struggle, her hands shaky as she grabbed her clothes. Her voice cracked as she tried to say something, probably some last desperate plea, but I didn't let her. I just turned away and waited for her to leave. As she gathered her things, I stepped outside and watched her load her car. Every step she took made me feel lighter, like a weight was finally lifting off my shoulders. I felt her eyes burning into my back, but I didn't look back. When she finally drove away, I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, feeling the cold of the wood seep into my skin. The silence was deafening, but it was my silence, finally mine after so many months of chaos. I took a deep breath, feeling the ache in my chest, the sting of betrayal still sharp but fading. I knew I'd made her pay, and honestly, I felt a strange sense of closure. What was left now was just picking up the pieces and moving on. But I couldn't help but wonder how she'd react once she realized what I'd done. I had all her recordings, her texts, her secrets, all of it. I planned to delete nothing. I wanted her to think her lies could stay hidden forever, that I'd never find out, but I knew better now. She'd regret this for the rest of her life. I was done with her, done with the pain, the betrayal, the lies. The trust was shattered beyond repair. I looked around my empty house, the quiet echoing in every corner, and I knew I'd never let her back into my life. Not after what she'd done, not after she'd desecrated my mother's memory, not after she'd played me for a fool. That night I sat alone, feeling the relief wash over me in slow waves. I finally understood what it meant to take back control. I'd never forget this feeling, the cold clarity of holding power over someone who thought they could get away with anything. It was a lesson I'd carry forever. And for anyone out there who's been betrayed like this, remember, it's not about revenge for revenge's sake. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your strength. Do what needs to be done and don't second-guess yourself, because once you do, you start to heal, and that's the real victory. The days that followed felt like a fog finally lifting. I threw myself into work, into fixing what was broken, the trust, the pain, the sense of betrayal that had haunted me. I knew my ex-wife believed she'd gotten away with everything, that she was free from the consequences of her actions. But I also saw through her, saw the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The lies she told herself, the guilt she tried to bury under tears and excuses, it all started to show little by little. I kept the recordings and texts I'd collected, hidden in a secure place. I didn't need to torment her anymore, I just needed to stabilize myself. Honestly, I didn't want her to feel safe or comfortable anywhere near me again. That was the point of everything, taking back my power, making sure she understood she'd lost the one person she'd betrayed the most. I eventually handed over the keys to the house and filed for divorce. It was a clean break, no messy arguments, no drawn-out fights. Just a simple, decisive step to close that chapter of my life. I handed her the paperwork, told her to leave, and that was it. She looked at me with hollow eyes, probably wondering what I was planning next. I didn't bother explaining. I simply said, "Goodbye and don't come back." That moment was oddly freeing. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. No more pretending, no more lying to myself about what she meant. I knew now that I'd been blind, but I'd also been strong enough to see the truth and strong enough to walk away. In the quiet that followed, I found my peace in small things, long walks, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected, and finally giving myself permission to heal. I let go of the anger that had threatened to consume me. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and I knew I'd carry some scars for a long time. But I also knew I'd come out the other side better, more aware, more resilient. Looking back, I realized that betrayal taught me a harsh but valuable lesson. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to cut out what's toxic. The revenge, in a strange way, was my reclaiming of myself, taking control when everything else seemed lost. I no longer define myself by her actions or words. I define myself by how I responded. So to anyone out there who's been betrayed, remember this: you've got power too. It might not feel like it in the moment, but it's there. You just have to find your line, set your boundaries, and be willing to walk away. Because nothing is worth sacrificing your dignity for. And in the end, the only true revenge is living well without them. I closed that chapter and I moved on. And honestly, it was the best choice I ever made.